I attended an online writers conference about a year ago. Some of the other attendees and I were exchanging book recommendations, and somebody mentioned a book by Shirley Jackson. Now, for some of you, I realize Shirley Jackson is a name you know, and so you kind of understand what to expect from a Shirley Jackson story. I did not know who Shirley Jackson was. Now, the story they recommended was not the one that she's best known for, which is The Haunting of Hill House. They recommended We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which I think is just a great title. I wish more authors would title their books in that way. I picked up the story really just based on the recommendation of this other person and just read it cold turkey without any background or understanding even what the genre necessarily was. Now, to be clear, it's a very sad and dark story, so it's not something I would necessarily recommend to everyone. I think what really appealed to me was the way that she weaves mystery into the story and leaves a lot of things unsaid. You're really forced to read between the lines to an extent. Now, just a couple weeks back, I finally read The Haunting of Hill House. And I would say that The Haunting of Hill House is similar in style, but that it's a little more vague. It's not really clear when you read the novel what all the backstory is. You're not really sure what is haunting Hill House at the end. You're not really sure why the protagonist kills herself. In We Have Always Lived in the Castle, a lot of the backstory is made clear toward the end of the book. The other thing that really captivated me about We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and this is going to be a little odd, but I worked for about 11 years in water and fire damage restoration, and at the end of the story, their house catches on fire, and then the fire department comes and sprays it all down with water. My experiences working in homes that have had that kind of damage really fired my imagination while reading that story. So it was very vivid to me. And I think if I went back and reread it, some of the details that I'm remembering now were probably not even in the story. But because I've seen real homes damaged by fire and water, it was just very vivid to me. I think Shirley Jackson's strength is that she combines mystery, suspense, and a lot of relational tension. The themes that were similar between The Haunting of Hill House and We Have Always Lived in the Castle, actually also in The Lottery, is this idea of personal, close relationships coming down to violence. Not only are you torn asunder from those that you love and trust interpersonally or emotionally, but you're also violently torn apart from them. There's a sense that you can't trust the people that you're closest to. They will turn on you. Really, the protagonists in both stories are not nice people. They're sympathetic in ways, but they're not heroes. They are very soiled. In my mind, it's inferred in The Haunting of Hill House that the protagonist basically killed her mother through neglect. It's not spelled out clearly, but it seems to be poked at through the guilt of her own conscience. In We Have Always Lived in the Castle, the protagonist is clearly a horrible, evil little girl, and she's done terrible things and seems to be completely untouched by guilt. The next book on my list of reads is Book 4 in the Rage of Lions series by Matt Barron, Eagles of the Grand Kingdom. I really like Matt Barron's style, that he weaves the dark things, kind of like the dark stuff in Shirley Jackson's stories, but he is not a nihilist, and so there's still hope and there's still some light. I will say, as far as the narrative it goes, this is probably the weakest of the 4 books in the series. It felt to me like there wasn't quite enough plot to fill up the book. He still pulls off a shocking twist at the end, and after it happens, you kind of realize you saw it coming, but you don't see it coming. Something about Matt Barron that really stands out is the combination of the dark and the violent with the good and the righteous. That's something that lacks in a lot of fiction and storytelling right now. We either have the nihilism of the latest Netflix series, where everything is hopeless and life is meaningless, or you have the pop Christian storytelling, either in film or books, where everything is happy and glowing and shining, and all the dark edges, even of the villains, are kind of smoothed off. Which reminds me of another book I read recently, actually reread, Frank Peretti's novel Illusion. One of the things I noticed rereading it that actually pulled me out of the story was how he shaved off a lot of corners of darkness. There's moments when you expect the villains to use bad language, and they don't, and it strangely stands out. And what makes it stand out too is that he doesn't hold back in other areas. So it's pretty clear he's writing for a particular Christian audience, and that Christian audience will endure violent descriptions, which there are some in the book, and it will endure people doing horrible things, but you can't say. And it's not that I want the book to have bad language, it's just that he's so clearly trying to set it in the real world, but by not having those elements, it actually feels false. I was challenged recently to read a psalm a day. You read the chapter that corresponds with the day you're on. So if it's May 4th, I would read Proverbs chapter 4. And I promise this connects, at least in my head. But as you read Proverbs, you find bits of wisdom that connect exactly with where we are right now, either in your personal life or in our culture. I see that as an example of how Scripture is so tightly connected to reality. The next story I want to talk about is a novella by Mike Duran called Wicker's Bog. It's not very long. You can definitely read it in one sitting, but it's a very solid, haunting ghost story. I don't want to say too much about it because it's definitely worth picking up and reading. I also read Mike Duran's book called Christian Horror, and this book is all about, should Christians engage in horror? Should they read it? Should they write it? Should they watch it? He does a fabulous job of laying out the arguments against and then arguments for. You can tell he's done a lot of thinking about the topic and has widely read about it as well. So I definitely recommend both of Mike Duran's books, both of which I read on Kindle, and they're relatively cheap to pick up on Amazon.